Hello, it's Delusion Dispeller. I'm here to read Chapter 6 of Safe People by Dr. Cloud and Dr. John Townsend. Copyright 1995 by Henry Cloud and John Townsend. And it's by Zondervan, I believe, where they got it. So here we go. Why do I choose unsafe relationships? I'm going to be only reading the first half of this. This will be part 1, and then I'll do part 2 after this. Not today, though. I'll be uploading only part 1. Roger was disillusioned with relationships. He sat in my office telling me that he had it with people. You know, he said, I think I'm just going to do the me and Jesus thing for a while. I can't go through another bad relationship. It seems that every time I make a really close friend, I get screwed. What happened? I asked. Well, I became friends with Tom when he was on the down and out. His wife had left him and he had been fired from his job. So wanting to be helpful, I took him in and nursed him back to health. In the process, we became pretty good friends, or so I thought. I began to trust him, and I told him some personal stuff about struggles I had been having with my family. Well, when he got back on his feet, he totally turned against me when I wouldn't agree with everything he was doing. Just because I disagreed with him on how he wanted to organize his business and deal with his former partners, he completely turned against me and started going around town telling people that I had done all sorts of terrible things. You wouldn't believe it. I run into people that I hardly know, like today in an attorney's office, and they say things like, I can't believe what you did to Tom. And then they'll turn and walk away. My name is mud all over town. And I really did nothing but try to help him. Look at what it got me. He looked dazed. When I asked him further about it, he said that this was not the first time that he'd been betrayed by a close friend. In fact, every one of his close friends had ended up betraying him in some significant fashion. Why must I at least find one good friend that will not betray me? Roger asked me. Whenever we speak about the importance of relationships to emotional healing and spiritual growth, someone will always ask the question, where are all these safe people you talk about? They seem to think there are no good people in the world. The real problem, however, is that they are unable to choose people. Why is it that we do not see who is safe and who is not? How is it that some people seem to have a talent for picking destructive people? Whether in friendship or romance, they seem to always end up getting close to people who hurt them. Are they just unlucky? Are their bad relationships all a result of pure chance? We do not think so. Although there are instances where innocent people are truly betrayed, when a person has a pattern of being hurt by relationships, it's usually not by chance. When people find themselves in destructive relationship after destructive relationship, they must finally decide that the common denominator in connecting all those bad people is themselves. But for us to realize that we are the problem is rare. When we have a series of bad relationships, we usually think, as Roger did, that people are just not trustworthy. We get very disillusioned about relationships in general and want to give up. Because we have a tendency to see the problem as outside ourselves, we think how bad the other person is. But in Matthew 7, verses 3-5, Jesus tells us, why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there's a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, then you'll see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Here, Jesus ties our focusing on others' faults to our own problems in seeing. Often we do not face what is getting in the way of our being able to evaluate people, our own character issues. Many of our poor relationships are our fault. That's what we will address in this chapter, the character flaws that cause us to pick unsafe people. We pick unsafe people because we have not come to grips with our own problems. Jessie illustrates this principle beautifully. One day in a group therapy session, she declared, this time I am going to do better. I've been married to 9 different men, all of them abusive. No, you haven't, exclaimed another woman in the group. You've been married to the same man with 9 different names. Jessie was startled, but slowly she realized that although her husbands were all different, all of them had the same tendency to hurt her. One may have been openly violent, another passively withdrawn, another sharply critical, but they all lacked the ability to give her the love for which she longed. So in order to change, Jessie had to learn that something about her own makeup required or allowed her to make these bad choices in men. Proverbs 4:23 says that we must keep thy heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. From our heart flow the issues that we keep finding ourselves getting caught up in. If we find that we have reoccurring dynamics in our lives, such as hurtful relationships with people, then we must look first to ourselves to see what's in our hearts. What in our hearts causes such things to happen. Let's look at some of the character flaws that cause us to pick unsafe people. Inability to judge character. One of the chief reasons we pick destructive people is that we are unable to judge character. Many times when we are choosing important people in our lives, we do not think of as the main factor. We look at how we feel, to whom we're attracted, or what seems to pull us toward a certain person. Our choices are very subjective. In a sense, matters of the heart are mostly subjective and unconscious, and that's not bad. Soul connection should not always be made on a rational basis. What a boring life that would be. The unconscious part of ourselves has a wisdom of its own, and in some ways our heart knows what it wants and needs. That is valid. But God has made us with two sides of our being, the rational and the emotional. When they're in conflict, we are in trouble. We need to use both reason and emotion in our choosing of people. We get into danger when we ignore our reason, when we find our hearts are attracted to people that are better than to choose. At those times, we find ourselves picking people who cannot satisfy our needs and whose character does not measure up to our essential values. Our hearts become disconnected from our values and in conflict with our true needs. Because our hearts have been programmed to seek some sort of sickness inside, we find relationships that match the sickness inside our hearts. For example, many single Christians find themselves falling head over heels in love with someone who is unloving or irresponsible. Jesus warns us to face first what is inside our hearts, and only then will we be able to judge others accurately and pick safe relationships. Our own character issues blind us to the destructiveness of other people. We must first realize that we have a problem in being able to judge character before we can stop playing the naive victim. Our lack of connection is a big reason why we choose unsafe people. If we are unable to connect in an intimate way with others, then we will often pick people who are unable to connect as well. If someone is isolated inside, she will pick isolating relationships until she addresses her own problem. Fear of abandonment fuels an ongoing isolating connection. Many times, someone who is in a painful relationship should set strong disciplinary boundaries or cut off the relationship altogether. Matthew 18:17, 1 Corinthians 5:11 through 13, for a time. But he fears being alone so much he can't do it. Every time he thinks of standing up to the other person or getting out of the relationship, he's overwhelmed by feelings of loss and aloneness, and he either avoids taking the difficult step to begin with, or he quickly caves in. Because he doesn't have a primary safe and supportive relationship, he would rather have the unsafe relationship than nothing at all. This all or nothing split keeps the isolation and the abandonment going. Defensive hope. Defensive hope is hope that protects us against grief and sadness. Simply hoping a person will change keeps us from the pain that we need to face. Humans are incredible optimists when it comes to destructive relationships. For some reason, we think that a person who is hurtful, irresponsible, out of control, abusive, or dishonest is going to change if we just love them correctly or more or enough. We think that if we just let them know about their mistakes or cry the blues or get angry, that they will change. In short, we have hope, but it is hope that disappoints. In this scenario, we use hope to defend ourselves against facing the truth about someone we love. We do not want to go through the sadness of realizing that they're probably not going to change. We don't want to accept the reality about who they are, so we hope. Usually this kind of hope did not start in our current relationship. We usually have an old pattern of not facing grief and disappointments in many past relationships dating back to childhood. Facing sadness is difficult, for it places the responsibility for change on us, instead of hoping that the unsafe person is going to change. We have to learn to not expect that he will change. We have to make other friends. We have to adapt to a non-fulfilling marriage. We have to get the courage to set limits and consequences and make many more tough choices that may change our relationships. Yes, hope is easier in the beginning, but in the end, it is more difficult. Not facing reality is to stay stuck and to get more of the same in the future. Defensive hope is one of the biggest reasons that we allow destruction to continue in life. Unfaced badness. Hang on, I'm checking where my page marker is. There we go. Joe was a super saint. He was one of the most responsible people everyone knew. He was faithful in his walk with God, very giving to other people, morally pure, and all the things that a good Christian is supposed to be. But he had a string of bad girl relationships. He was very attracted to women who were quite the opposite of him. Women who were impulsive, irresponsible, morally loose, and generally immature. Joe had a tendency to be holy and be irresistibly drawn to unholy people. The problem is that neither Joe nor anyone else is completely holy. Mark 10:8. We all have bad parts that we need to own and confess. 1 John 1:10. If we do not own our badness, we will often hook up with others for help in keeping the illusion alive that the badness is outside of us in someone else. Many people choose unsafe relationships because they have not faced their own badness and are finding it vicariously in someone else. The dynamic is very familiar to parents whose good teenager hooks up with a total loser. Unconsciously, the teenager is trying to bring the split polarities together. When the family begins to own its badness, the teenager will not have to go somewhere else to find some. Merger wishes. Susie was in love. She sat in my office and ecstatically told me of the new man in her life. Neil was everything that she had ever wanted, and she felt like she had never felt before. He was financially successful, well respected in the business community where she worked. He was one of the leaders in the singles ministry at her church. He had all the polish to which she'd always been attracted. Strong and aggressive. Neil seemed to be able to master any situation. But as I asked her more and more about the relationship, I discovered that her new relationship did not have much substance. When I asked her about how she and Neil relate, she'd start to talk all over again about who he was, what image he projected. He does this, or he knows so-and-so, or he has one of those, Susie said, but Neil did not seem to show real interest in her as a person. He seemed to be using her as an object to bolster his picture of himself. Susie was very attractive. In reality, she was more of a hood ornament than a person to him. But when I tried to point out some of this to her, she would have none of it. She could not see that they were not building a strong relationship. I could see that when all the excitement wore off, she was going to be a very empty person. What was she doing? Psychologists call it a merger wish. She was trying to make up for the things she felt she lacked inside by fusing her identity with Neil. Susie's family was poor and her family was passive. Her father was passive and not very successful. By merging her identity with Neil's, Susie felt like she could make up for all the shame she felt about herself and her background. His image, his money, his standing in the community and the church. These were all things that she had always admired in others, but never felt she could have for herself. Now through Neil, she could become part of all those things. There were other reasons behind Susie's merger wish. Neil was aggressive and strong, able to assert himself in the world. Being strong and standing up to people was difficult for Susie, as was making a successful life for herself in the career world. She covered up for her lack of assertion by being loving and kind to others, giving to her friends so they would like her. The thought of learning how to become more assertive and stand up to strong people frightened her to death. She hated conflict. So, with a strong man by her side, all her problems were solved. She did not have to learn to be a strong person. She had one. She did not have to learn how to formulate goals and pursue them. He did. With him by her side, she had done everything without even having to. The seduction of a merger is that someone tries to achieve her spiritual and life growth goals without doing the difficult work. But in reality, this pattern blinds us to the flaws in other people's character and can lead to many destructive choices. Okay, hold on a second. 1, 2, 3. Okay, I'm going to stop there because it's a lot to read and I need to go take a nap. So I hope you enjoyed that. I'll be back with more a little bit later, possibly posted tomorrow. I'm not sure. Anyway, we'll see you on the next Safe People. Have a great day and be safe.